This lecture provides an overview of sources of ethics, questions to guide ethical decision-making, ethical theories, and a brief discussion of ethical issues in sport. There are two traditional sources for ethical guidelines. The first is religion. So in Christianity, the things like the 10 Commandments that guides individual behavior. And the second is philosophy, which basically defines right versus wrong conduct that helps lead to an equitable and just society. Two other sources of ethical guidelines include things like sportsmanship. So research indicates that coaches who encourage their athletes to engage in sportsmanlike behaviors, like help people up when they fall down, shake hands after the game, those players are obviously more likely to do that, and the works in the reverse too. So coaches who encourage their players to act dirty, hit people after the whistle blows, that spills down to those athletes. So if you have good sportsmanship and have a culture of that on your team, it encourages people to behave ethically. And the second is codes of conduct. So what we're seeing a lot more in youth sport is to have parents sign a code of conduct about parental behavior on the sidelines of games, to help curb parents yelling at coaches, yelling at referees, and yelling at players of the other team. The next few slides will walk you through a number of different ethical theories. The first ethical theory to talk about here is utilitarianism. The basic principle of utilitarianism is that you're creating the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So while some people may be upset or did not benefit from this decision, a majority of other people did. There are two primary principles in rulemaking. The first is beneficence, which is to create a rule to do good. The second is non-maleficence, which is keep people out of harm's way. The third part of this is autonomy, so allowing people to have some ownership, ability to make decisions on their own. And the fourth is thinking about justice and fairness to all. In terms of justice and ethics in sport, breaking the rules of the game is a big problem. The rules of the game are really important to the integrity of the game and making sure it's played fairly. So when people break those rules, they're violating ethics. So another area of justice is commutative justice, which refers to fairness in contracts, so that collective bargaining that occurs in many of the major sport leagues in the US, like the WNBA, NBA, NFL, and so on. There's got to be fairness in those contracts. And the next one, distributive justice, refers to fairness in society at large for the distribution of things like food, shelter, and healthcare. Some argue that being ethical involves being kind to others. So this ethics of care is focused on relationships and developing positive relationships with other people, and that's the most ethical you can be, or so those people would argue. Aristotle argued that ethical people, or good citizens, had these four characteristics. The first was prudence, meaning they took their time making a decision. They were just, they had a good name, a good reputation. Temperance meant that they were reflective, and fortitude referred to their behavior or courage. McIntyre argues sport, like other fields including medicine, law, and the ministry, has four aspects of professionalism that are inherently ethical. The first is, in all of these fields, you need some sort of specialized skill or knowledge. So being good at goalkeeping is a specialized skill. You go through specialized training, goalkeeper camps, and so on. It's a virtuous activity, meaning it's inherently ethical. You're not going to cheat. You're not going to come off your line early. And then there are self-governing standards of behavior. So things like sportsmanship, that people know not to do certain things in games and police themselves. We may have all heard about the golden rule versus the platinum rule, so other things to think about in terms of how you treat other people. So the golden rule is to treat others how you want to be treated, and the platinum rule, in comparison, is treating others how they want to be treated. So if we think about this in terms of diverse cultures, you want to treat people how they want to be treated because their community, their cultures, their values may be a little bit different than yours, so you want to respect those differences. There are three things to think about when making ethical decisions. The first is to try to remain impartial so that people don't perceive your outcome as one-sided. So gather all the facts, gather all the data, then you want to reflect on that, review the information, think about your possible decisions, and then also figure out if there are any precedents. So in your organization, what things have people done, cases have, how they've been decided, how have situations been resolved, and is your decision in line with those previous precedents? And thinking about the previous slide, the four-way ethical decision-making test doesn't necessarily tell us how to act ethically, but provides us with a set of questions to help us think about and assess whether our actions are ethical. So the first question you want to ask yourself is it the truth? So did you gather enough information? Did you learn all the facts that you need to know to determine what's true and what's not? The second question, ask yourself, is it fair to all concerned? So is the outcome that you're implementing, that you're about to decide, is it fair? The third is, will it build goodwill and better friendships? So is this ethical decision that you're about to make going to help you or going to damage these relationships? And the fourth is, will it be beneficial to all concerned? So is it going to help everyone, or is it going to push some people to the side and then we just carry on our day? There are a lot of different ethical issues in sport, but here are just a few. The first is the idea of exclusion or lack of access to sport for certain groups of people. So research indicates that girls of color in low-income communities lack access to sport, don't have programs in which they can play and participate in. We also know that less than 10 states in the US actually have an adapted sport high school program. So there are a lot of people out there that have disabilities that may want to participate in sport, but they actually don't have access. The second issue, gambling in sport. Right now, a number of different states have legalized gambling, like Iowa just last week legalized it, which last week right now is August. So you'll be able to gamble on sport in various states. Is that going to create an issue for professional sports? The Raiders moving to Las Vegas, is there going to be a higher likelihood that athletes are going to start gambling on games? The next is performance enhancing drugs. So should we even test for it at all, or should we just let athletes try to hit their peak with their ability and these drugs to give us the most entertaining product? The next is violence in sport. So on the field, hitting people after the whistle, we've got fighting in hockey, those types of things. Are those ethical? And finally, corruption. In the last year, there have been a number of different lawsuits related to the NCAA, and certain organizations are like Adidas trying to funnel players, basketball players to certain programs. So how do we deal with those issues and try to get corruption out of sport? To sum it up, ethics is based in religion and philosophy. It can also be based in sportsmanship norms found in sport, codes of conduct. There are a ton of ethical theories out there, so trying to figure out which ones you subscribe to, reflection is an important part of that. And reflecting on how to make an ethical decision, keeping in mind those four ethical decision-making questions. And really the overall key takeaway is that ethical issues in sport are not new. We've talked about exclusion and access in sport for a long period of time, based on the idea that African Americans and women were historically excluded in sport at the professional level, at the high school level, and the collegiate level for long periods of time. Gambling in sport, Pete Rose has not been led into the Hall of Fame because he gambled on sport, the White Sox scandal in the 1920s. So all these things are not new. We haven't figured out a way to behave ethically in sport because we want to win, basically.